have been a staple of my life for a long time. I remember following the vets at the clinic that I gained experience for before vet school, where I watched them vaccinate horses or help them castrate some pigs in knee-deep mud. During vet school, I shadowed at the big horse hospitals in Lexington, and when I was there, instead of hanging out at the clinic with the world-renowned surgeons, I got in the truck and traveled with the vets to the farm. It was exciting when I finished school in Lexington at a horse practice where all the nostalgia of working in the horse industry seemed true. When I graduated and started my own business, it was an ambulatory business. I made farm calls and I enjoyed it. I was out day and night in all types of weather. I remember pulling dead calves in 90-degree weather and working on a colic in negative 17-degree temperatures. I enjoyed it too. It was variety. You never knew what you would run into at the farms. It made me think, and it made me apply my education to my own wit and ability to solve problems. I also enjoyed seeing the farms and houses. It gave me a great idea how people actually lived and interacted with their animals, and let me see all the neat ways that people created their lives, from their unique houses to their own solutions to problems. It helped me understand at the basic levels we are all the same and struggling with the same problems. I always figured I would get a brick and mortar clinic, and I did. And I'm glad I did, because to a certain point my farm calls became untenable. I reached the height of what I could make doing farm calls and understood, long before I reached that time, that I wanted a life from my business that could not be afforded with just farm calls. That and large animal work decreased during the COVID times, which would have put a gigantic hurt on my business. But I did and still do complete farm calls. I have other episodes out which take you through the journey of my farm calls. Please listen to the clinic change episodes if you want more information on that. However, I see the end of farm calls approaching. There are many factors that may end farm calls. One, if my truck breaks down, I have to consider if it is worth the clinic getting another truck, because farm calls don't generate as much money as they used to. When I can see more patients, which clients like because that keeps prices and wait times down, and that makes me more money, it's hard to justify investing in a farm call truck. Two, speaking financially, it's hard to find a price that makes farm calls reasonable for both the client and the vet. Three, there is some legislation coming out which will make it impossible for me to complete farm calls. I recently talked about the Board of Vet Medicine in Kentucky making updates. Please listen to Better Know Your Practice Act for more information about the changes to how veterinarians can practice in the state of Kentucky. I'll have the link to that episode in the description. But I want to get to some specific legislation which I have just learned about, which will make farm calls more problematic. And I hope to encourage you to write to the board and your congressman and your governor to ask for this to be changed. And who is you? You are likely the people in rural areas where there's only single vet practices. You are likely the people who need farm calls for your large animals, and you are the people who enjoy the convenience of farm calls for small animals. Let's look at some of the other factors that got me to the point of saying farm calls may end before we dive into the legislation, because this decision itself is not made in a vacuum. Another episode I'll link in the comments is my episode on horse trailering. Take a listen to that episode on why trailering your animal is important, as well as discussing the cost of owning a truck and a trailer. I completed a survey of my clients, and 57% of respondents expected farm calls to be between $50 to $100. 28% thought between $100 and $200. In my trailers episode, I talked about the value of a farm call and how farm calls for people without trailers save horse owners about $9,000 a year. In my survey, on average, most people saw a vet 1 to 2 times a year. Now, because I save someone $9,000 a year for them not owning a truck and a trailer does not equate exactly to a farm call being worth $4,500. But I think it does give some wiggle room for farm calls to have some cost. My farm call prices have ranged over the years from $40 to $200. And if you count emergency appointments, that $200 high end of the range goes up to $300. That is challenging, as the majority of people in my survey budgeted for all animal expenses, their feed, their boarding, supplements, and medical expense. They budgeted only $200 to $500 per month or less. I calculate my farm call price based on the number of farm calls I complete, the price it costs me to pay for staff travel time, and the expense of the truck per year, i.e., gas and mechanic fees. Those fees can vary widely, as you all have probably felt the pinch of an unexpected part replacement for your car, or the fact that new tires are needed more often than any of us desire. As discussed in other episodes, because of the price and the fact I wasn't making the money on farm calls, since many of them want a farm call for only one animal, I restricted farm calls to groups of 5 animals or more. This worked well on my end, but frustrated clients. I kept playing around with this, trying to find something suitable for both clients and vets, and was finding for less than the 5 animals, it seemed unrealistic for what I needed to charge. As I always do, starting this new year of 2025, I reviewed my numbers. I found that I could complete farm calls for less than 5 animals, and financially speaking, would only have to charge $150 per call versus the $100 I charge for groups of 5 or more animals. I was ecstatic that the numbers were that low because I think the previous year what I would need to charge for an individual animal was around $250, which was more than most of my clients wanted to pay. But there are other factors regarding continuing farm calls to consider as well. As I said, I enjoy farm calls, but I don't need them in my life like I once did. So I'm usually looking at other things, like how can I keep providing to pay for my staff? How can I provide better care to my patients? What if I'm gone and an emergency walks in my clinic? What do we do? My staff enjoy and look forward to farm calls like I did when I first started, but I have other things on my mind. My staff and I at meetings often debate farm calls because so often we see medical care provided on the farm not being up to the standards we want. That's another discussion, and it's not saying we complete bad medical care, but we don't have all the tools and options on the truck that we do at the clinic. Farm calls are a different beast than office appointments. We provide excellent care at farm calls, but it is different from the office calls, and often we felt people were not understanding those differences. We also saw people not doing as much for their animal because it involved extra steps. Yes, we can treat this, but we do not have that drug on the truck. We need you to come to the clinic. Most people did not follow up at the clinic. So, are we providing the care clients want? These people said they wanted to follow up, but they have busy lives. I find the more steps to vet care, the less likely people are going to get it. And here's the other thing that gets to the point of this episode. While I was running farm calls, I needed the office to be making money. As I described earlier, I calculate farm calls to cover truck expense. I still have a clinic to make mortgage payments on. How was I doing that? Well, tech appointments or office appointments that my staff could run while I was not in the building. These are the appointments where you don't need to see a vet. Perhaps a blood draw recheck. Perhaps a Cytopoint or a Librela injection update. Perhaps you just needed a vaccine booster. This has been a lifesaver for me and allows my clinic to be functional while I am at the farms. And also, without these appointments, whether I'm at the farm or not, my clinic would not be able to financially survive in the rural region I practice in. To be blunt, the economics of my region won't support a vet without the technician appointments. Tech appointments are less expensive than vet appointments and allow clients a financial break to get the services they need, such as a rabies vaccine. I remember a client not long ago drove an hour to get to my clinic because the tech appointment allowed them to vaccinate their dog on their budget. Sadly, these clients didn't figure the 6% tax that Kentucky put on small animal patients, and we watched as the clients rummaged under their car seats to find the change to pay the tax after they maxed out two separate credit cards. People often don't want to see the vet, and I've come to terms with that. Hence, my tech exams. A less expensive option for clients that just can't afford a vet visit and just aren't interested in my medical knowledge. Many people just update their rabies. I ran a vaccine clinic where we charged $5 for a rabies shot, and we had a parking lot full of people for hours. When I increased that cost the next year to $10, the number of people who attended the rabies clinic decreased to a handful. That made me discontinue the rabies clinic the next year due to lack of interest. It's not that I don't want to provide rabies vaccines at a reasonable cost, but I actually lost money that day, even at that high volume after paying staff. The original hope was that most clients would also take advantage of other services at the vaccine clinic, such as other vaccines or heartworm checks. But that didn't pan out, so we had to raise the cost. I want your animals to be vaccinated, but I can't afford to pay for the pleasure of doing it, and I shouldn't have to. $5 discouraged people. The difference between my tech and vet exam is $25, and that's before any vaccine cost. I need tech appointments. My clients need tech appointments. And farm calls need tech appointments. So what is being considered being passed by our legislators? House Bill 69, an act relating to rabies vaccines. The link is in the episode description. But they say to define veterinarian and veterinarian technician and to amend KRS 258.015 to require that a Kentucky licensed veterinary technician authorized to vaccinate a dog, cat, or ferret against rabies be under the direct supervision of a veterinarian that is located on the premises of the facility. This update appears to be meant to bring the language in sync with the Updated Practice Act, which is great for clarification of the law, but this wording is problematic. The biggest issue to what I have been leading up to is that it requires direct supervision, that the veterinarian has to be located on the premises to administer a rabies vaccine. How will this affect you? First, it hasn't clarified if assistants can administer a rabies vaccine. If it has to be a licensed technician, I only have a licensed technician 1 day a week. In general, Kentucky is not technician friendly, and there are not nearly as many techs as there are vet clinics. I require rabies vaccines to be up to date in animals at my clinic. 1,857 animals, or 20% of my patients, are not up to date on their rabies. Many of these are updated at the tech appointments. If I can't use assistants to give rabies vaccines, I can't offer tech appointments because too many vaccines come due at tech appointment times. This would affect the financial stability of my clinic overall. Second, if I move everything to vet appointments, the price goes up. And as we discussed, many of my clients just won't be able to afford the vet exam prices. And that means overall rabies compliance will drop. Lastly, we would have to stop farm calls. When I discussed this with my staff, we just could not figure out a way to manage the schedule where farm calls worked out, but kept me in the building for tech appointments. We discussed a certain day of the week for farm calls, but by their nature, not all people want farm calls on one day of the week. We've tried grouping farm calls before on specific days and have had very little success with that. When it comes down to it, if this bill passes and I have to be in the clinic for my assistant or technician to administer rabies vaccines, I will have to discontinue farm calls. Tech appointments are more crucial to the clinic than farm calls. I would have to choose continuing tech appointments for overall stability of the clinic. Tech appointments are also crucial for rabies. And we don't want to lose tech appointments because rabies is crucial to public health. Or is it? We all talk about a lack of large animal vets and how they are important to our food supply. So why are we making legislation that curtails the ability of large animal vets to make farm calls? Not doing farm calls will hurt large animals. If I am unable to complete farm calls, my cattle business will be limited to sick calves people can haul to the clinic, which will basically result in the elimination of my already suffering cattle business. Is this what Kentucky is trying to do? Shut down one of the last vets trying to protect the food supply in northern Kentucky? As far as horses, I have already seen a decrease of appointments because of the inability of horse clients to haul their animals. Plus, I haven't even talked about the fact that sometimes large animals are down and need a farm call because they can't be hauled. Will this affect you if you don't use farm calls? Well, not if I stop them. Probably get you seen quicker. But if I do continue farm calls, it would limit the time I can offer tech appointments, and it would limit the time my techs can be profitable. It will be harder for you to get a tech appointment. If you use a multi-vet practice, then you'll be fine. One vet can complete farm calls and the other can stay at the office. For us solo practitioners, we will look at the finances and say it is more profitable and we can serve more people and animals being at the clinic. I won't have to continue maintaining a truck, and I have haul-in facilities, so people can still use me if they want to, at least for horses. And I guess a calf too. So yeah, I can still see newborn calves. But I couldn't see adult cows. I don't have haul-in facilities for adult cattle. If this law passes, that will be the day that my farm calls ends. In the episode description, I have links to the Kentucky Board of Vet Examiners, the governor, and your elected representatives for the state. Please contact them and tell them that you oppose this bill. And don't oppose it entirely. There's more to the conversation, and from their point of view, they are trying to make rabies vaccines more accessible. They just aren't looking at the bigger picture. Just suggest they reword the law to allow administration of rabies vaccines under indirect supervision by vets, vet technicians, and vet assistants at a veterinary facility. Will that save farm calls forever? No. As I said, this is multifaceted. But when farm calls are on the chopping block, this would be a death blow for solo practitioners, at least in my community. I'm Dr. Nathan. Thanks for listening. I hope our discussions are valuable to you and aid in giving perspective. If you want to contact us, please reach out to theveterinarypodcast@gmail.com. You can find a complete list of the podcast episodes on SoundCloud. If you find this information helpful and want more content, please join our Patreon, patreon.com/theveterinarypodcast. And don't forget to follow our Facebook page, facebook.com/theveterinarypodcast. As always, thanks for listening, and I hope this information is helpful to you. If you do find it helpful, please like it, share it, so other people may find it helpful as well.